I've had a, a lengthy and quite varied career in ELT, but for the last 7.5 years, I've been working here in Bucharest. And I hope that I have a fair understanding of Romanian learners, but I'm sure that through your contributions in this session, I can find out a bit more. So we're starting a new academic year, and I like to carry out some reflection in anticipation of this, thinking about what I can do better in my teaching this year. And one area that I came up with was that of incorporating learner training in my classroom. I think it benefits not just newer teachers, but all of us to reacquaint ourselves with some basic principles. Oops, skipped a slide. So that's why I've chosen this as my session aim. So I'll give you 10 seconds to read it. Okay, so the first job for you, what are we actually talking about here? What is learner training? So you've got a minute or so to think about it. Don't jump in to type too quickly, but think, what do you understand by this expression, learner training? And then when you're ready, you can type some ideas in the chat. And my colleagues, Soreen, Alice, Iwana, will feed back to me the ideas that you've written. So I'll give you a minute or two to think about this and type.
So answer is already coming in.
Yes, people are very quick.
Diana saying, Diana Conte, she's saying, teaching them how to learn.
Yep.
Alina is saying, learning to learn. Gabi says, learn how to learn or study. Gabriela saying, the first thought, teach learners how to learn. Andrea's saying, give learners the strategies needed to become better learners. Timea saying, getting students acquainted with some of the routines that are helpful in learning. And a lot of teaching how to learn.
Yes, I mean it is kind of self-explanatory, isn't it? Learner training. But there were few more with a little bit more in depth. I mean, the one about the strategies, I think, rings a bell with me.
Yeah.
What I did was ask AI, and this is the definition that AI produced for me. Again, you've got a little bit of time to read the information on the slide. So that echoes what you typed in the chat previously, perhaps in a little bit more depth. And some of the activities are shown at the bottom of the slide in red. And I'm going to cover some, not all of these, in the rest of the session. So before we move on to the next slide, before I said have a think, and before you do the next activity, do stop and think. Don't jump in too quickly to type your answers, but really think about the next question that I'm going to ask you. So we're going to start with goal setting. And I've put an example of my own here in the middle of the slide, which you can read. And now I'd like you to take a couple of minutes to think of your own resolutions for this new academic year, this new term that we're starting. So do think about it. As I say, don't be in too much of a rush to get your idea pinned down in the chat. Okay, so I'm actually going to give you 2 minutes before I start talking again, or before I ask Soreen. Okay, so I had a quick look at the chat. If anybody wants to add more ideas, please do. And they're all very interesting. One that I particularly noticed was from Diana Contes. Hi, Diana. And it resonated with me because of something that some research I was doing yesterday. I was watching a TED talk with a man talking about the future of university education. I think he was from one of the Scandinavian countries. Um, and Deanna has said fostering collaboration rather than competition in her classes. And this was his main idea that for the future in university education, it needs to focus more on collaboration rather than competition. So that resonated with me. And I think it's a really good personal aim. Let me see, some more people have added. Yep. Being more open to concepts from the students. Yep, I think that's a really nice one. Critical thinking. Oh, yes, very important. But kindness, Mihaela, that's I think a nice idea too. So you might be thinking, why have I asked you to do this? Because it's about learner training. Well, I think I asked you to do it because I think teacher modeling of desired activities, actions, behaviors is really vital in our classrooms. So I think you need to model what you expect the students to do. You don't necessarily have to share your personal goals with them, but also introducing the concept of SMART goals, particularly from the teen years up. Maybe for the primaries, it's not that appropriate, but encouraging them to develop goals that are SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Okay, so let's move on. This is the next idea is kind of connected. Oops, I went backwards. It's kind of connected to goal setting. And I've called it early doors Q&A. Has anybody come across this expression before, early doors? What do you think it could mean? Again, you'll have to type in the chat. Any thoughts on early doors? Soreen, have you heard the expression before?
Um, no, I haven't actually.
Uh-huh.
New
Okay.
to everybody's saying the same. New to everyone.
What are they saying? Sorry, and tell
New,
me.
new to me. Um, Somebody saying building foundations,
Uh-huh.
what you already know.
Yeah, it's actually, if you look at the dictionary definition, it just means doing something early on in a situation. But it's actually a reference to pop culture in the UK. A long time ago, many years ago, pubs in the UK were only allowed to open at certain times of the day. And in the evening, they opened, the earliest they could open was 5 o'clock. And those people who were waiting outside of the pub at 5 o'clock were your early doors customers. So it related to drinking early in the evening when the pub doors first opened. But I think it's quite a nice little colloquial expression to know. Let's do this early doors. Anyway, getting back to the topic of learner training. You can do this yourself, or I've put the comment on the slide that higher level students could design their own questionnaires and a set of questions about learning habits. And I've put an example that you can see. But what other questions could you put in such a Q&A? And again, you need to type your ideas in the chat box. So I'll give you a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes. What else could go in an early doors Q&A? Okay, I can see some really, really good questions, but keep adding them because I'm sure people have more ideas. I'll give you another minute to add some more. Okay, I had a look as you were writing in the chat, and some really good ideas. A lot connected with the what. What do you do? Also with the when. I think somebody put in a really interesting and useful question about when do you study best? So what's the most effective time for you? Which goes back to the definition about students understanding their own preferences and strengths and weaknesses. And perhaps a really, really important question is why? Why are you studying? Because often I've found, people don't really have a clear idea of that. So I think that's very useful. So people have added a few more. Just let me have Daniela, special room. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Andrea, recording. Yes, Anishwara's put Y, I think. Uh-huh. Okay, Diana, again, your idea of have you found something new you can teach your classmates? We'll actually refer back to a bit later in the session, but some really, really good ideas. Oh, I just added a few more that you can see on this slide. They're not exhaustive. You've added some other great suggestions. But I think this kind of activity with learners beyond a certain age, I mean, maybe not so much with the primary, you'd have to find different approaches to this kind of training with primary students, but certainly with your teens, I think it's very good to form the basis of discussion and mutual advice giving in the lessons. I mean, what somebody is missing, another person might be able to fill in. Oh, I never thought of that. So this kind of discussion early in the term, I think, can be really helpful in helping your students get good habits and learn from one another. Okay. If anybody wants to ask a question, put it in the chat. Soreen will monitor and will pass it on to me. So just before we move on. Yep. So no questions yet. But yeah, if you do have a question, don't be afraid to put it in the chat and I'll do my best to respond. Okay, now I'm moving on to notebooks, and a few people mentioned taking notes and recording a little bit earlier in the chat. And I think as we've come to use technology more and more in the classroom, and thank God for it, we've perhaps lost the habit of writing things down, of recording things as we used to. And it's a bit unfortunate because I think the act of recording, the act of writing, aids memory, and it also gives us, as learners, a set of materials to review. I think the teacher, one thing you have to do if we're talking about exploiting notebooks is the teacher has to make sure that all students have one and bring it, and that there is time allowed in the lesson for recording. So when you've put new information on the whiteboard, new vocabulary, information about a new grammar structure, the students have time to record this in their notebooks. But again, contributions in the chat. In what other ways can we exploit notebooks in the classroom? What can we use them for? What can we ask our students to use them for? So again, a couple of minutes to share some ideas. Okay, I can see some ideas that coincide with mine. Anybody else wants to add anything? Go ahead and do it. Okay, Donna, that's really good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, Duncan, that's a good use of the notebook to write down unknown words in text, the words that are not essential to answering the questions, but students may be interested in to look up afterwards. Okay, so I can see that a learning diary, yeah, that's a really good idea from Deanna. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, Alina, remind me, what's KWL? Can you type it out? Type your acronym out a little bit. No, what do I know? Uh-huh. What do I want to know? And what have I learned? Yes, I couldn't remember what your letters represented. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's really nice as well. So the ideas that I had, you've added and expanded on in the chat. So recording vocabulary, but not just writing words, but having a system for writing words, maybe putting it into a sentence to illustrate the meaning. Deanna said for the younger learners, having a visual so that they can, connect with the meaning. I've put, and I think somebody expressed this a little bit differently, but the same idea, having corrections pages. So two columns, perhaps what we said with the error, and then what we should have said with the correct options. Drafting was one of my suggestions, brainstorming and mind mapping. And again, these are the ideas that you've put in the chat, and the one that was mentioned about making a note of words I want to look up later. I think that's really good because it can take up time if students are asking questions about what is this word, and it's not important to the understanding of the text or the activity. Another thing I thought, it's connected really with corrections and recording vocabulary, but maybe using it, having pages for elevating language. So you have columns, if the students are doing an activity that maybe mirrors an exam task, speaking or writing, and they say something's good, or it's beautiful, how can we elevate that? So we're going to do better in our exam. So they have, I said good, and I could have said outstanding. That might also be a good use of vocabulary or a notebook. Now, I'm doing a bit of selling here for the British Council, because recording vocabulary is really, really important. And everybody has a different preference, a different thought about how they would like to do it. And this page from our Learn English Teens website allows you to explore different options with your students, different ways of recording vocabulary. And I will, you can take a screenshot. I'm just thinking I need to put it for Sorin to put in the chat. Or maybe I can put it in the chat if I can copy it. Bear with me a moment. And then
Don't
you can
worry,
follow.
Kathy, it's already in the chat.
It's
People
in the
have
chat.
helped. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I can sit back and let somebody else take over. Right, now I've lost my... we're back. Okay, so it's worth exploring with if you've got teen classes. I think it's a very useful resource. I think, need to... Oh, Mihaela had already shared it. I wasn't sure if it was the same link, Mihaela, but thank you very much. You're my charming assistant. Okay, so I think one other thing that we haven't mentioned about notebooks, if you're teaching young learners, it's a record of learning that the parents can see. And I think that's quite important. A lot of places now we use Can you see my screen still?
We can see it. Yes, it's working.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I think in a lot of organizations now, we use digital ways of communicating with parents and advising them what happened in the class. But I know that's not, those links, those, sites are not always used by parents. So if you're sending the child home with a notebook that's been used and used in a variety of ways, I think it's very encouraging for the parents. It shows the parents, yes, I'm getting what I'm paying for. So I think that's an added value of notebooks. Now, you're seeing the using notebook slide. Okay, that's good, Deanna, because I haven't moved on yet. Now I'm moving on. Okay, so another important thing is reflection and reflection on success. And this can happen before and after the tasks. So one of my colleagues this morning mentioned in the session on classroom management about success criteria. And I think it's important that students know what success looks like in different tasks. So I've put a couple of examples of different kinds of productive tasks that you might do in the classroom. So a jigsaw reading and speaking activity, or asking students to deliver a presentation on someone that they admire. Now, for the jigsaw reading and speaking activity, I've actually noted below some of the success criteria I would expect. So I'll give you a little bit of time to read through them. And if you have any questions, again, you're welcome to add them to the chat. Okay, those questions, those success, the criteria that I've put up relate to kind of just the mechanics of such a task. It may well be that there is a further communicative purpose to this jigsaw reading and speaking activity, and I haven't added any points for that. But what I'd like you to do is think about the presentation task, presentation on someone you admire, and what success criteria would you agree with your students for such a task? So again, think and then type, and you've got a couple of minutes once more. Okay, I can't see anything appearing in the chat.
We have
Okay,
something
yeah.
from Duncan now. Yeah.
First, yes, I got something from Duncan. Yep. And Malika, great, thank you. Yep, again, thank you, Deanna. Maybe also think about the more, now, so we're getting to kind of some of the mechanics of the task. So yes, Timea, was there a set of structures that you wanted them to use? That's really important. The way that the presentation is delivered, I can see from Rekha, that's really important. Can my peers, can they hear me? Can they understand me? The structure of the presentation, is it structured correctly? Okay, if there's visual aids, yep, have you used them appropriately? Are they illuminating the talk, adding to it? Some really good ideas there. I made a note, and I got some others like, have I included all of the information required? So I think that kind of goes back to what Duncan was saying, who the person is, what my relationship is, all of the points. Does my talk respect the time limits? So I think that's a key one. I know maybe with young learners, not so much, but certainly I've had the situation with adults where the task is a presentation and they don't know when to stop talking. And it's very uncomfortable for everybody. So have I respected the time limits I think is a good one. Yep, have I used presentation skills effectively? So that could be your voice, it could be your posture. Do I have a relaxed posture? I think with presentations, am I speaking to my audience and making eye contact, or am I just reading aloud from my piece of paper? I think we've mentioned the structure and the way that somebody uses their voice. I'm not speaking too quickly, I'm not speaking too slowly. So all of those things would be important. And I think it's something, it's good to do this pre-task so that the students know what the expectation is and they know what success looks like. Again, I'm skipping slides. Another thing that you might want to use that's a kind of reflection, a pre-task reflection, is a checklist. And I think this can be quite useful in helping students overcome habitual errors. Or for writing tasks, I mean, students can design their own checklist that might focus on the specifics of the task requirements, but also on their own areas of weakness and or repeated errors. So that can be very useful. I mean, here, repeated errors, when I think about writing and I think about my Romanian students, repeated errors could be, have I got run-on sentences in my writing or comma splices? So a checklist can be quite useful in terms of focus on accuracy. And then I have a problem with my mouse and it's not behaving very well and it keeps skipping. So hopefully this time it will go to the next slide.
Try with a keyboard, Kathy, it might work better.
Yeah, probably. I'm so dependent on the mouse, and when it doesn't behave, it upsets me. But you're right, I could use the keyboard. And then another aspect of reflection is post-task. So at the end of the lesson or after a productive task, to ask the students to think about what they did successfully. So again, this can refer back to the success criteria that you've agreed. And I know it's important also to think about what didn't go so well and why that happened. But in my experience, Romanian learners are very good at finding the negatives and not so good at giving themselves credit for what they've done well. So I would try to focus more on what was done well and which habits to follow to repeat success in the future. And you can follow this up with a question and answer session that draws out the factors, what creates success so that students have a record and they can repeat successful behavior in the future. I mean, I was thinking about my own reflection that I can do post-lesson or post-task. And I thought of an example of reflecting on why a task worked better with one group of students than it did with another. And so my reflection, the task was a mingle activity where students had to try to persuade their classmates to invest in their business idea. And with one group, it worked much better than with the other. And I thought, well, what was the key difference? And the key difference with the second group, I'd given them monopoly money. So they were actually giving each other money if they wanted to invest in somebody's business idea. And it made the task more engaging for the learners and promoted further discussion, longer discussion. So from that, I learned, my learning point was that I should maybe always think about how realia can support activities and promote them. Okay, I'm just checking my time. I've got a little bit of time left. So going back to the beginning and when we were thinking about what is learner training, and it's, teaching our students how to study better, to explore their own preferences, strengths and weaknesses, etc. But I think just because people have the label students, we imagine that they know how to do this already. And it may not be the case. So for example, I teach adults by and large, and many of them really don't know how to study. And this may be because they've simply got out of the habit. Their school days, their university days were a long, long time ago. They might also kind of be reliant on outdated expectations of what happens in the classroom. So the pedagogical approaches they experienced previously, we don't use anymore. Can you think of any other ideas or reasons of why students actually don't know how to study? And I'll give you just a minute or two. If you have an idea, another example, quickly pop it in the chat. Yeah, they haven't been told or shown. So we haven't done the learner training, or they've not experienced it in their previous classes. That's a really good point, Duncan, about attention span limited due to overusing screens. I mean, this is one reason why I like students to actually write down vocabulary in a notebook rather than just be dependent on the screen or photographs. Yep, distractions. Glad you've mentioned that, Alina. We're going to come on to that in a moment. Yeah, Timea. Yes, I think there is a trend, there has been for a number of years, a trend of the idea that we can learn languages quickly, that there's a special method, and if you buy my course, this special method, you'll go from A2 to C1 in 10 minutes or something. So that they come in with unrealistic expectations. Yep, just lacking training. Yeah. Yeah, Duncan, that's kind of what I'm thinking about with my older learners, that they're not used to it. Used to be memorization. Yeah, fast food learning. I'm skipping from comment to comment because they're so interesting. I hope you get a record of these ideas later. Okay, great. So I'm going to show you now just some things that we can do to kind of help students become better learners or learn how to learn. And the first one does relate to something that was mentioned, the distractions. So it might be an idea to get your students to think about when they're doing the homework, when they're not in class with you, what distracts them? Is it their phones? Is it the TV? Is it the pet dog? And maybe get them to do comparison exercise. So let's say, try doing your homework without the distractions. It may be a bit uncomfortable locking yourself in a room, leaving your phone, but try it and see if you're more time efficient in completing your homework. Are you doing your homework better? Is this producing better results? So that's one strategy that you can ask them to experiment with. Again, the second one, I think this came up in a previous comment about asking students to explain things to each other. I think having to explain, having to take on the role of teacher reinforces your own understanding of a concept. And, using think, pair, share before you put anybody on the spot to answer. Jigsaw activities are very good for this peer teaching, and they also tie in with improving note-taking skills, which we'll see in a moment. The next one, spaced practice. I mean, we try to build spaced practice into our timetabling so that we regularly recycle things that, have been taught in the classroom, like a grammar point. I think it's important to raise students' awareness of how spaced practice helps. And if you've got teens and they've got exams coming up, I mean, they can create study plans that build in this spaced practice, that build in this revision of the things that, they need to study more. So those are a few ideas, and there are more. Yeah, we looked at notebooks, and we can't assume that students know how to take notes. So this is part of the learner training. And we need to offer different options. And as you can see, if your students are of a certain level, they can discuss what works for them, their own techniques and strategies. The point on the previous slide about jigsaw activities, I think jigsaw activities can be really good if you train the students that when they're reading their text or listening to their text or presentation, they have to make notes that are detailed enough that they can transmit the information to their partner without going back to the source. Also thinking about, what kind of words do you write when you take notes? Practice in expanding notes into complete sentences, and without with paraphrasing rather than copying from the original source. So there's a lot of work you can do in the classroom on making notes work. Another idea is memory workouts. I think for these, maybe if you've done a new language point, a new grammar structure, or maybe students have read a text that has really interesting content, might need some questions to guide them. But this kind of activity can be really helpful. And then, of course, go back to the original source and see how much they remembered. Oh, I've jumped again. So these are my last suggestions. Breaks in study time. This is something I talk about with one of my colleagues, Andrea, because we tend to find ourselves sitting at our computers all day long, and it's not healthy. It's not healthy for your mind, for task achievement, but it's also physically not healthy. You need to get up and move around. And I don't know if I can put this in the chat, but I came across something called the Pomodoro technique. You can research it yourselves anyway. And it's about spending 25 minutes and then getting up and moving around, doing something different for 5 minutes, and then coming back to your activity and repeating this. And apparently it makes us more productive. Okay, final thing, embrace the challenge. So things that I thought about that could challenge students might be using English-only dictionaries, or trying to be less dictionary or Google Translate dependent if they're reading a text. Another idea could be switching off the subtitles. Maybe not for the whole film or the whole show, but from time to time, and trying to understand, make sense of what's happening without the subtitles. Okay, I've got another couple of minutes, I think. What I wanted to say at the end is that didn't have time to look at exemplars, which I think are also really useful, of looking at good and less good models and asking students to analyze what makes one better than the other. But the thing that occurred to me as I prepared the session, as I was coming to the end of the preparation, was that actually there are some new challenges in learner training that are out with the scope of this session, but that we do need to start thinking about. I don't know, maybe somebody will take this up as a workshop or a presentation for the next conference. But what I was thinking about is that we need to train our learners in how to use AI effectively in their studying. And that's a massive area. I think at the moment I see AI used for plagiarism, but it can be very helpful, but students need training in how to use it well. And I think the other thing that really we need to think about these days, and lots of us people have mentioned critical thinking, training students to distinguish between fact and opinion in what they read and what they hear, and how to check the credibility of the sources of their information.